This guy is DevForge. This is why I'm not a subscriber to him at all, that he would put out this video in the first place.
JavaScript is broken, and somehow it runs the entire...
It is, in fact, broken, and unfortunately, it does run the web.
Entire internet. It's the only language where you can write total nonsense, and your browser just shrugs and says...
Which is a damn bad feature.
Sure, I'll run that. And yet it...
If only it didn't let us get away with it, that would be so much better.
Powers everything, from Netflix, Spotify, to Notion, and even SpaceX.
And I'm supposed to worship it because it runs a lot of bloated web applications that run like dog shit. You know, it was bad enough that the history of browser development was one that, you know, because of hacks and everything, each individual tab... You know, which I'm now exerting tab discipline, by the way, here eats up an enormous amount of RAM and everything. You know, that was bad enough on its own, but now you've got this other, you know, problem where you've got a bunch of web applications and things like Discord that want to run their own browser at the same time as everything else. And by the way, I'm not hurting for RAM resources anymore. I got 64, you know, gigs, basically. So, you know, obviously I'm running an Xbox 360 emulator at the same time as recording with OBS. But, yeah, I'm cutting back because there's no need to have this much running at the same time right now. There just isn't. But, yeah, let's keep going.
Dashboards. So, how did this glitchy little goblin of a language end up running the world? JavaScript was built in just 10 days by one guy, Brendan Eich, while working at Netscape in the 90s.
Which is horrifying that it went on to become so used.
That's barely enough time to build a half-decent to-do app, let alone a programming language that would eventually run billion-dollar companies.
Well, you're objectively right about that.
It was originally called Mocha, then renamed to LiveScript, and finally, in a marketing-driven move, rebranded as JavaScript. What started as a quick browser hack ended up becoming the backbone of the web.
Which is horrifying in of itself, in a situation that we never should have ended up in, but unfortunately, WebAssembly didn't exist for a very long time, and unfortunately for all of us on this planet, you know, the other programming languages were not allowed inside the browser until relatively recently. These were the PHP and JavaScript were the only languages web browsers accepted, and so you have a whole generation of web developers that were raised to write shitty code in JavaScript and try to scale huge applications to be in JavaScript, which, by the way, as a law, JavaScript should never be used for large-scale applications, but of course DevForge says it's perfect. No, it isn't. And by the way, V8 and just-in-time compilation doesn't solve this particular problem. It still runs too slow.
It's like duct taping a scooter and ending up with a Tesla.
Well, see, again, you're right about that.
Still, the hate never stops. JavaScript...
And that's why it's trash. I don't understand how you can make such statements about it and not realize that proves the point that it's trash. You know...
is trash. It's inconsistent. It's not a real programming language.
All
they
true.
hate it because it lets them write bad code and still get away with it.
All true. It's a scripting language, which is completely different than a programming language.
You can write something like this, and JavaScript will just smile and return an empty string. No complaints, no errors. Just pure chaos that somehow works. That's the beauty of it. You can write the messiest, most cursed code, and your browser will probably still...
Yeah, no. Like, if you've ever opened up your browser console to see this and look at the errors, then you know they're piling up all over the place, and the fact is JavaScript is just taking the abuse and everything, which is no wonder it runs and performs so terribly.
Will make it work. But when you understand JavaScript, you unlock a whole new level of power. Slack, built with Electron. Notion...
Slack is a bloated piece of shit that eats up way too much RAM. I don't use it because of the fact that it's an Electron app. It's way too RAM expensive. You know, it's bad enough. See, the reason why browsers got to be the way they are, you have tab isolation, right? This was necessary because you didn't want it if a tab crashed, you didn't want it bringing down the whole browser. This increased stability, you know, of the web browsers, as well as reduce their vulnerability to somebody sending you, you know, to a website that you would go to, and it would load, and it would crash your entire operating system and bring it down with the, and force a reboot on your throat and everything. And because there were a lot of amateur script kiddies that, figured out how to do shit like that and were running around causing that kind of chaos and disruption to people's lives and everything. The web wasn't designed originally with the hacker mindset in mind, and the average the average script kiddie was not the thing that was in mind for the developers at the time, that people would be exploiting all kinds of tricks to crash people's computers and that sort of thing, to troll each other.
Runs on React. These aren't side projects. These are billion-dollar...
Yeah, they're billion-dollar bloated pieces of shit.
...platforms powered by JavaScript. Like it or not, it works.
Like it or not, well, it does, in fact, work, unfortunately, because that will mean that it will get adoption that it doesn't deserve.
What makes JavaScript truly unique is how flexible it is. Most programming languages lock you in...
Unique in a terrible way. Script typing is massively superior to dynamic typing.
...to a certain style. JavaScript just says, do whatever you want, I'll figure it out. Want to write procedural
not good.
Code? Cool. Object-oriented?
And that garbage collector, by the way, for your memory, it eats up a lot of compute power. It eats up an enormous amount of it. So, it's better for programmers just to manage their own language, manage their own memory, because there's no trade-off there. You're not suffering a massive performance overhead for doing it.
For it. Functional? Absolutely. All three in the same file? Sure, why not? You can build at the speed of thought. It's the language that gives you just enough rope to either build something incredible...
You know what? The number one argument for JavaScript, right, from even my vantage point, is ultra portability. That's it. That's the only thing about it. That's the only thing that makes it really, 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 great. It's the only thing that it has going for it, right? It is ultra versatile, since every operating system and every platform has a fucking web browser. Your code will essentially not need to be ported to each individual operating system. But at this point, the world has ossified around basically two operating systems. Some variant of Linux or .nix, and by the way, with this, I'm including BSD. It's BSD is just a different configuration of Linux, basically. So under the hood. So or Unix or whatever you want to classify it. It's the command line basically looks the same. There's just an optimized suite of applications that's a little bit more thoughtful in the BSD world and everything. It's a great operating system, I'll give BSD that, but it's not fundamentally different from Linux. So there's basically, two operating systems competing for your time. Mac OS doesn't really count as its own because it's also Unix, and that gets classified in my brain as star.nix, as well, which Linux is as well, star.nix. If it ends in NIX, it's a form of Linux, and so, all these things are Linux, basically, but not really from an exceedingly technical point of view. They're like, Linux/new or .nix/new. From that vantage point, but they're the Linux kernel paired with news terminal tools, basically tooling, and that's new is pretty great at the end of the day. But no, I mean this is just getting worse as time goes on with this video. I mean, this is a person who makes a great point about why JavaScript is a shitty programming language and is the worst programming language in the world, and then comes out and somehow mysteriously interprets that as making it the best.
Hang your entire app. And that freedom, that's what makes it addictive. Now,
just because it's addictive doesn't mean it's a good thing.
Let's talk about the ecosystem.
The toxic ecosystem where people keep releasing new frameworks all the time, and there's a constant need to keep up with all the new frameworks. God, that shit is the embodiment of toxicity.
Because this is where JavaScript
really flexes? God, fuck no, it doesn't. This is where JavaScript shit the bed.
Flexes. NPM has over 2 million packages.
that all have to get pulled in to run anything on NPM, which makes it a bloated, expensive piece of shit.
Making it the largest package registry in the world. If you can think of it, someone's probably already made a JavaScript library for it. JavaScript in 2025.
JavaScript is almost exclusively used to write things that it shouldn't ever be used to write.
Is a completely different animal. We now get...
Which V8 is not a solution at all. You know what? I prefer V8 hadn't happened. I wish that it hadn't happened. I wish that JavaScript had remained slower than it is now. I wish it remains in its original state at the original speed at the fucking initial launch way back in 1995. And it stayed there forever, frozen in ember. You know why? Because if it had stayed there, if it hadn't been for these assholes updating it in V8 and the asshole team behind it, you know, we would have had WebAssembly years prior instead of kicking the can further down the road like we have. It would have forced their hand to do the difficult work of bringing the other programming languages onto the web and into the DOM.
Yearly ECMAScript updates with modern syntax, better performance, and more power. Features like async await, optional chaining, and destructuring make code cleaner and easier to read. And if you want structure, there's TypeScript.
JavaScript is such a piece of shit that it needs TypeScript.
JavaScript's smarter, more organized cousin that's perfect for
scaling
large apps.
Nope. JavaScript should never be used for large-scale applications because it performs too slow. So it should not be used at all at the large application sector, and that is including with just-in-time compilation, which doesn't make enough of a difference to justify its use at large scale.
On the front end, frameworks like Next.js, Svelte, and Astro are rewriting the rules of web development. Yes, JavaScript has quirks, plenty of them.
This is not... these aren't quirks, these are giant flaws that are so massive they make the programming they make it basically an error, a mistake that means it shouldn't be used.
-3 gives you 2, but 5 plus 3 gives you 53. At first, it feels like the language is trolling you, but once you understand the logic behind these quirks, your brain starts thinking differently. JavaScript
type correction and everything and coercion is a fucking terrible feature of the language that makes debugging so much harder than it needs to be.
Forces you to get creative, to think around corners, to solve problems in unexpected ways. And that mindset will make you a better developer, even in other languages. No language is perfect, but JavaScript, it's everywhere. It powers your browser, your favorite apps, and companies worth billions.
No,
that's not
my favorite apps? No, those are not my favorite apps. Those are my least favorite apps because they use JavaScript! Period! I hate them with the fire of with the fire of every star that could ever possibly exist and has ever existed combined into one superstar. And that is including beyond the boundaries in which the light will ever reach us as well. The boundaries of all the stars in existence, no matter how far away they are.
An accident. That's raw impact. JavaScript isn't just a programming language. It's a survival story. A glitch in the system that somehow became the system. It's messy, it's chaotic, but it's also fast, powerful, and incredibly flexible. And whether you love it...
It's not fast, and it's too flexible. You know? It is slow. It is still too slow. At the end of the day, it's resource intensive. It uses massive amounts of, memory to run. Slack is a bloated piece of shit that slows my system, which I want to be used to run this sort of thing. This is pretty great. And by the way, it's also better written because they have to. If they didn't, write it in actual programming languages, everything would go to shit. It would go to the dogs. It would barely function. It would be unbearable to actually play. And everything. You wouldn't be able to do it. So they did the one thing that they had to do to do that and everything. But no, JavaScript should never be used for large-scale applications.
Roasted. The fact is, JavaScript won, and it's not going anywhere. Thanks.
That is awful news, and it makes me want to kill myself.
For watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Electron is such a piece of shit, and I hate it. I go down into the comments and somebody writes why JavaScript is the best programming language, and then wrote it out and wrote why JavaScript is the best web programming language, and then someone else wrote, if you think JavaScript is just a web programming language, you know very little about computers and didn't even watch the video. JavaScript runs the biggest servers with Node, VS Code built with JavaScript, Electron, React Native on a massive mobile. React Native is massive on mobile, which I barely touch my phone, by the way. So that's not a fucking feature that makes it good. That is just a flaw. A deep flaw that makes it a piece of shit because it's massive on mobile. JavaScript dominates everything, even NASA dashboards, satellites, and simulations tooling. I'm horrified. They should be using C or Rust instead of this sort of thing. The only exception is NASA is system level programming. Dumb shit. You can't have automatic garbage collection and to make operating systems, and you're forced to use C instead. Well, yeah, like I was pointing out, that garbage collection, that has a massive performance overhead, to do. It slows everything down to a fucking crawl, and VS Code is a bloated piece of shit. So, I wrote a PowerShell script that is able to alias everything and, to run YT DLP and everything. I had it written for me and everything in this program, which is known as Vim. Infamously difficult for somebody to learn the command line operations on, but HK JL, so J is down, K is up, H is to the right, L is to the left. So I've got that shit down at this point, I don't know why it's not going back up. But yeah, I did this, and I know how to switch modes. To insert mode would be your hotkey to insert text to this thing. Escape to get out of that, and then really just quit. So because of the fact that I don't want anything to be on it. That colon key is, for the ability to issue a command and everything. No right change to. So I use Vim instead. I went tutor. Oh, there's no Vim tutor on here. All right. Well, I even went down the rabbit hole and everything of using it. So let's pull it up at everything to run this particular shell on here. So, oh, come on. There we go. Ella. I infamously did this on this whole tutorial on the web and uploaded a video of myself doing it, and everything. And I did this, in part, to explain my complex motivations for going down that particular rabbit hole. and everything, and doing it, and in fact possibly doing it multiple times and everything, just to nail that particular thing in pretty hard was, for one thing, I'm a fan of the power commands and everything, and the ability to issue hotkeys and everything, because I know that they enable you to get work done in your workflow, to get done a lot faster and everything, to have hotkeys on the keyboard, because you can do a lot of things in a text editor a lot quicker if you're using keyboard commands compared to having to point and click and navigate menus and everything and all that bullshit. That takes time. It eats up an enormous amount of time to, for the end user to actually do that, so you can get things done in Vim a lot quicker than you can in any other fucking text editor at the end of the day at everything. And this is not down to elitism on my part. I'm not an elitist. I want people to learn how to use it and everything. Like, this is good if people use the Vim tutor, and go in and learn this stuff. It's good. It doesn't take that much time at the end of the day for a normie to actually learn how to do it and everything. It is a little bit, there is a little bit of a pain at first, but it's kind of like learning to ride your bike at first was scary, painful maybe at first, and maybe the keys were a little bit hard for you to press when you hadn't had that exercise in your legs, and everything, but eventually you did adapt and get used to it. Well, Vim is no different than that. It's an experience, and once you adapt and get used to it, that may just be typos on my part since I typed so quickly. Once you adapt and everything and get used to this, you're able to navigate around, One of the things that makes it pretty great too is GT 120. Shit. Right, now I remember GT 100, and everything to line 100. See, it will navigate down to this, to line 200 by just hitting GG 200. It'll go all the way down to that and everything, and I can configure it to Vim, to do this and everything, and to get this, this sort of thing on my Vim and everything, and I need to actually go in and have the damn thing properly configured so it shows line numbers and everything, because remembering where the exact line certain things that may need to be edited on will make everything a lot more efficient and clean with it and everything. So it displaying the line numbers and also the distance between the lines will be useful. I was watching Kenny with Mental Outlaw for that, but yeah, she talks about VS Code, and VS Code is a bloated piece of shit that no one should use, and VS Codium doesn't solve that particular flaw. It just burst out of the containment that Microsoft tried to put VS Code in. But it doesn't fundamentally solve the problem of it being a bloated piece of shit text editor.